Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Gabbard, for your service, both in Congress and in our U.S. military. I want to talk to you a little bit about your perspectives on China. How do you view China in your national security role?
Our relationship with China is one that is complex, given how closely our economies are linked. There are a number of challenges and threats that need to be navigated with respect to China, some of which have come up most recently with this very serious cyber exploitation in Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon that seemingly took us by surprise, and the compromising of our major telecom companies and an area of significant and great concern.
So some of your past statements that are relevant to China are concerning because I don't think it fully appreciates China's perspective towards the United States. For example, with regard to TikTok. Your past statements have essentially said that requiring domestic ownership of TikTok is a violation of civil liberties, and the national security concerns are complete BS. Can you explain why you have this view on TikTok?
The position that I previously made, obviously not as a member of Congress, as you consider the TikTok legislation, were centered around the protection of Americans' First Amendment rights and the lack of data privacy legislation, frankly, that would apply to TikTok, Facebook, X, all of these different social media applications that collect on us as users of these applications. There were other provisions within that legislation that granted very vague and grandiose authorities to the president on deciding which private companies are or are not a national security threat.
So let's talk about China specifically, because this is where I want to make sure you understand what's at stake. We've had concerns over many years that when China owns infrastructure, it can manipulate that infrastructure. It can use it for spying. It could use it, turn it on or off. And you've actually addressed some of the most recent cyber attacks that we believe China had relevant participation. The challenge is if China owns TikTok, it means they can spy on the United States, on the American people. It can take all the data from our children. It can change the narrative about what people are talking about through their algorithms. If it wants to create misinformation or malign foreign influence, it's very easy. So can you understand why it's so important that we require domestic ownership of TikTok?
I understand the concern, Senator. I would just reiterate some of my concerns that I stated in the past about how this really is an issue about data privacy, because so much of what is collected by all of these, even U.S.-owned companies, can be sold to any country.
I get it, and that is a bigger issue for Congress to wrestle, and I am all in for that conversation. But I want you to appreciate China. What is your view with regard to Taiwan? Do you think it is something that your intelligence efforts will understand how important our relationship is with Taiwan, specifically on chips manufacturing? I think President Trump has most recently decided to have a 100% tariff on all chips from Taiwan. And your statements, particularly about the bill we passed, the CHIPS Act, to make sure that domestic production is invested in, and so that we have that supply chain, and so we have that national security. But your public statements about the CHIPS Act have been very negative and don't seem to appreciate how important that independence is for our national security, to be beholden to China, to be beholden to Taiwan, to be in a place where we can't do our own national intelligence.
Yes, Senator, I fully support the investment in building and strengthening our own domestic capabilities. If I recall, that legislation had a lot of other provisions in it that had nothing to do with the production of our own capability, and I felt were a distraction away from and a potential obstacle towards achieving that.
So you will recommend to the president that we continue to invest in the semiconductor industry in the United States for our own independence as well as our own national security?
Yes, Senator, and I would base my recommendations on a number of these, all of these issues if confirmed as DNI, based on the full assessment of the intelligence picture so that the president understands the ramifications and the potential cost towards any one of these policy positions that he will make and all of you will make.
And last, I want to return to the Soleimani strike. At the time, you said it was illegal, that President Trump did was illegal, would cause very significant problems down the line. What is your position on that strike, and will you be able to advise the president in future issues with regard to national security?
Those broader issues that I raised with regard to war powers, I have been consistent on. I didn't have access to all of the information behind that strike at the time, and my concerns were that that may be an escalatory action. President Trump was right. There was no escalation beyond that, and his policies towards Iran turned out to be very effective for our own national security.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand.
Do you disagree with the president taking away the protection for those who are now being targeted in retaliation for the Soleimani strike, such as previous Secretary Pompeo?
Senator, I can't answer that without being able to look at the intelligence assessment and the threat assessment for that or other decisions.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand.